with welcome to Beaver Politics. This is Indigenous Matters. Treaty 6 will be here in about 5 minutes. Tonight, her topics are going to be remembering John A MacDonald. She's going to have a little talk about that. I'm going to be playing a clip from Pierre Poilievre on that as well. Depth of a plough, resources belong to Indigenous peoples, and then treaty partnership and the role of the settlers. So those are going to be her 3 topics that she's talking about tonight. Like I said, if we can get those the shares out, if you hold your finger down on the picture where it says Indigenous Matters, just hold your finger down on the screen there. It'll pop up a screen that'll bring up a whole bunch of your friends on there, and then you can hit send to all those people. That'll get the shares up there for us. Each one of those counts as a share instead of hitting that little share button over on the bottom right corner. Every time you do that and you send it out to like 10 people, it's only 1 share instead of like 10 shares to 10 people. So, if we can get at least up to 10K before she gets here with the tapping, if everybody taps the screen and fills up that bar at least once or twice, that'll easily get us over 10K likes. And what else was I going to say? Tonight, don't forget to
land acknowledgement.
I'm sorry?
Did we do a land acknowledgement before we start, or should we?
That would be a treaty's the one hosting, so I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not.
No, we'll wait for treaty.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So.
Sorry to cut you off. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
it was a thought.
Yeah. No. Treaty's the. I'm gonna wait for the host to do all of that kind of stuff. So.
Absolutely.
I don't remember where I was.
I'm sorry. That's my fault.
It's okay. Yeah. The panel, when we have panelists up here, make sure we're gifting the panel as well, guys. These guys are providing extra insight, extra emotional labor, knowledge. Treaty's here. Yay. Yay. All right.
Woohoo.
Fantastic. Hello. No worries, Desiree. All right. Well, I already did the welcome to Beaver Politics for you. And I've explained some of the topics you're talking about tonight, but I'm going to let you take the floor now and do your thing, and then let me know whenever you want me to play that little clip for you.
Okay, thank you. I don't know. Can you see me all right? Like, I just got into this room, so I'm not even set up.
You haven't hit save on your camera.
Okay. There we go. Oh, you just see my face? Good enough. Oh my gosh. Thank you. Thank you so much, Charity, for filling in while I was hustling to get settled. And welcome everybody to Beaver Politics and Indigenous Matters on Monday nights. Whew, just bear with me for a moment because I've been running. I've been on the road since 7 o'clock this morning, flew from Edmonton to Toronto and just got to Halifax. So I'm in a whole other time zone across the country, and actually seriously just walked into my room. So, all right. And now something interesting. I'm here on the Mi'kmaq territory in Atlantic Canada. So welcome everybody to Indigenous Matters. Because I'm in a different time zone, tonight I am going to have to stick to the max 2 hours for our live. Hour and a half would be ideal, as I haven't had supper or anything, and I do have meetings to be at in the morning. So I just want to make sure that everybody's good with that. And again, in our way as Indigenous people, if we can give each other the space we need to speak, to listen openly, listen to understand, not to respond. And I like the rule my daughter reminded me, nobody should speak twice until everybody spoke once. So if we can try to stick to that. But tonight, as you know, the last few weeks have been, I still really want to talk about trying to get our people out to vote. Some of the issues that are pretty important to us today and what we're hearing from the politicians in Canada. And specifically, I did want to talk to everyone or with everyone about what Mr. Poilievre had said in one of his, I think it was like 2 or 3 press releases ago, or when he was speaking about kind of like that good old days attitude of when John A. MacDonald was the prime minister, and how he was stating that we shouldn't be apologetic for our history. So maybe this would be a good time then. Let's have a look at that clip. Nerdy's going to show the clip for us so we can chat about it a little bit, and we'll reminisce about Sir John A. MacDonald.
I can play it with the volume. Showing the clip actually gets us flagged a little bit because TikTok's weird about that, but I can play it for sure.
Okay, let's do it.
And most of all, being proud of our country and unapologetic for our history. We need to honor our past and our shared values. We need to live out the dream that started with John A. MacDonald. Yes, I said John A. MacDonald.
Did you hear it okay?
You. Yep, I heard it. I hope everyone else heard it too. And I think this is really important and something we need to talk about. And something I was thinking about this morning as, kind of getting my thoughts around what I wanted to chat about tonight was when John A. MacDonald was the prime minister of this country, was when a lot of, the colonial policy was being implemented, and residential schools, the rail, coming out west, settling the west, all of those things were priorities to that government. But something I was thinking about is those were the days that our ancestors were not even viewed as human or citizens of this country, and they had no right to vote. So they didn't have a say in who was going to lead this country. Things have changed for us now, and we have that right. And our voter turnout as Indigenous people is quite low. And I'm hoping that maybe we can inspire some folks to reconsider their position on not voting, to honor those ancestors that weren't able to vote back then. They didn't have a choice. We have a choice now, and we can make a better choice. And I'm very afraid of a leader that romanticizes those days, that is nostalgic about it, and feels that there's no need to apologize for the genocide that was practiced on our people, the colonial policies that were written over the last century and a half, and all of the struggles and hardship that has come out of as a result of all of those policies. So let's talk about it. I see we have two guests up. Cece, I saw that you were on when I logged in and you kind of dropped off. So I know I want to acknowledge that you were up, and we can start with you. And I see Lisa Dawn, if you don't mind, we'll start with Cece because he was on the panel when I signed in. So take it away, Cece, if you have anything to add about John A., or even if you want to talk about something else.
Racist, and his face should be taken off our money because he committed genocide against our peoples, and we killed Indigenous people, starved them. He's horrible. He's just he's a racist. He committed genocide, and I don't know. He's just evil, and he did horrible things. And he was just a white genocidal maniac. And I have nothing good to say about the guy.
I'm with you, brother. So I also know you're in Alberta, right?
Yes.
And what are you? Are you from a First Nation and live on a First Nation?
I'm from a First Nation, and I live maybe a 2-minute drive from my res.
Nice, awesome. So, what is your turnout like?
I'll be moving on to the res because we're in the middle of getting some new land claims. So, yeah, once we get that, I'll be able to get more land on the reserve. It's just we weren't given enough land to live on the reserve, but now we'll be getting more land here soon on our reserve because we did a land claim.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so we were negotiating for about 60 years to get land, and we finally got an agreement, and we've been waiting for 15 or 16 years after we won the land. It's taken them that long to transfer over the land back to us, so it's a long process. And we'll get 40 additional square miles of reserve land that we were entitled to under the treaty that we never got. And so it'll be great for us because we don't have enough land right now for our membership, and we'll be getting more reserve land. And it's good in so many ways because it's something that a lot of people fought for in the past, want to see, and they never got to live to see that worked on this land claim. They wanted more land for the reserve, And a lot of people have spent a lot of time working on it, and now we're getting it. So it's good that way.
And like, what a shame that is. Like, I want to acknowledge what you're talking about and how long it takes to settle some of these claims, like specific claims, treaty land entitlement claims. None of that goes quickly. The provinces and the municipalities all often stand in our way because they don't want to give up that tax base of private land ownership. And once it becomes reserve land, then they're no longer collecting taxes for those lands, and it's so problematic. They didn't stall, or there was no delay in taking up those lands long ago. And now when we are trying to make some reparations for what was lost and what's actually owed, it takes forever to realize that outcome, and it's really unfortunate. And it's sad what you said about people that started this claim that weren't able to see it through to fruition. But I also wanted to ask you as well, we're talking about voting as well, because these are all critical decisions, and something I think about what you were saying and how long it takes for the government to settle these types of claims is often to be times I can't help but wonder, because we're not a consistent voter base. So it's easier to brush us off. They know we're not coming out to vote. And they know that we're not going to sway that vote, right? So a lot of times it doesn't motivate them to act more quickly than it would, say, for like a group that's a lobby group, or somebody who's like a group of people that are more politically active. So I am curious about your nation. Do you guys have a good
Yeah,
voter
we,
turnout?
we vote, but the thing is, no matter what government gets in, they're all slow. And they all promise us things like we thought, oh, the conservatives are taking forever. They weren't doing anything. Then the NDP got in there, and we asked them, yes, can you give us our land now? We're waiting so long. Like, you guys fight for like Indigenous people. You claim to like support our rights. Can you just hand us the land? And they couldn't, eh? Like even them, like, and I'm like, who else? Who else are we gonna believe? Like they all take forever. And
Yeah,
when we rely on their systems.
I agree. Okay, well, let's think about that for a minute. And but again, like, all of these outcomes stem all the way back to John A. MacDonald and the settlement of this country and the colonial policy that started with that government. But I'm going to turn the floor over. I see Marie Smallboy has joined us. If you don't mind, Elder Marie, I'm gonna turn the floor over to Lisa Dawn. She was here, and then we'll go down to you if you don't mind. Go ahead, Lisa.
Tense everyone. My name is Lisa Dawn. Full disclosure, this is my mom leading this circle, but I really wanted to be here and chime in on this one because history has been weighing heavy on my mind and heart this week. And I've been thinking a lot about how to honor our past without repeating mistakes. Actually, my latest TikTok is a little bit talking about how we shouldn't be echoing, some of the horrible mistakes that we've seen already, and how we can learn from those and move forward together better, having learned from these past atrocities. And so for me, when I think about how to honor our past, for me, it's learning from it. And I fear that, when we hear people like PP speaking about it, he's dragging us backwards in a sense of not honoring the past by learning from it, but honoring the past by repeating it. So that was really what I wanted to say. Thank you for hosting. I enjoy these conversations very much. Hi.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, and yeah, for everyone's sake, that is my baby. So, but agreed. And like, I did see your TikTok just as I landed in Halifax, and we are supposed to be learning from the mistakes of the past and not glorifying them, which I feel that speech from Mr. Polyev was very much about glorifying that history that's so, we all know now. The truth part of Truth and Reconciliation has taught us a lot about what was happening back in those days. So, anyways, I see you, Jenna, but I'm going to turn the floor over to Elder Marie, so that she can have an opportunity to share with us. So go ahead, Marie, and just so you know, you are muted. Oh, there you go.
Took a while.
That's okay.
No, kakyo. I've been kind of cruising. I've been kind of keeping tabs on what's going on globally and what's going on with south of us, and also what's going on in north side of the medicine line. I'm struggling with trying to conceptualize what we knew as Turtle Island in our hearts. She is our sacred motherland, and trying to come to grips with the reality that I find myself in right now, where YT supremacy has overtaken the mindset of pretty much, I would say 99.9% of humanity. And that's scary because because I've lived through so many generations of movements and have participated in my time. I participated in a lot of our right to education and stuff. But I fear for 7 generations and beyond what the genuine, authentic Neo Cascadelia said, was gonna, how they're going to be. Will they reflect our ancestral way of being? And I say that because of the dominant societies. We're always seem to be trying to fit in within the colonial framework of reference, and I'll use Section 9124, Indians and lands reserved for Indians. It's a very YT supremacist provision for our people under their regime, and the articling or the according of our treaty and Aboriginal rights under that regime, and they've obviously split us into 3 groups for purpose. And the existing rights that are now being filled by the colonial courthouses does little to reflect our actual Indigenous law as our ancestors knew at the time of treaty making. So for me, it's a real struggle to come to terms with my reality, where we've kind of succumbed to and I'm not going to use nice words here, to the prostitution of our sacred motherland sources of life, namely water and the minerals that live within us, and it's damaging our own perception of ourselves. Well, I'll leave it there.
That what you just said just sits with me so deeply, because I feel too like I've been watching this in my career and through my learnings, because I wasn't really raised with my indigeneity or a lot of awareness in my culture, but I've learned a lot through my career, and I've seen this change in us as Indigenous people even. And I was guilty of it as myself, and working in the oil and gas sector in Alberta, having that taste of what that perceived wealth. I was by no means a rich person, but definitely had more money than I'd ever had before. And it didn't last long, that love for that lifestyle for me, but I did see it amongst some of my other Indigenous colleagues too, who, really kind of got more attached to the city life, got more attached to their consumerism and buying the nice clothes and having the things and trips and stuff, and have seemed to have forgotten their connection to our Mother Earth. And what you just said about that, like in the prostitution of our mother and how it's kind of disconnected us, is really such a tragedy. And it goes back to that white supremacy type of policy that was imposed here. And for everyone that's listening, Elder Marie had mentioned 9124, and that's the Constitution Act of Canada, Section 91, defines the jurisdictions of the provinces and the federal government. And Section 9124 states that Indians and lands reserved for Indians are the jurisdiction of Canada. So we fall outside of provincial care, I guess, and there's a whole long discussion we could have about fiduciary obligations and things like this, which are, we can talk about. Definitely, we've got time, but it's kind of a sidetrack. But I think it's important that everybody understands that we as Indigenous people in the Constitution a couple of times, and one time is where we are defined as the jurisdiction of one government over another. And this is taken away. And I think sometimes I think back on it, and it's like by design, because the provinces have control over the things that we need to practice rights on the land, to retain our identity, our language, our way of life, our culture, our ceremonies, all of that, and sustain ourselves with the resources that we were accessing prior to settlement. But so this division of power, because we're the responsibility of the federal government, but the provinces are responsible over the management of land and resources. So they're in conflict with each other all the time. And they've set up the laws and some of the policies in this country so that it's really challenging for us as Indigenous people to go to that jurisdictional authority and say, hey, the provinces aren't treating us right. It's happened. I can attest to that. Like I've actually been successful in my career to get Canada to reconsider a decision they made, because I was able to demonstrate that Alberta would fail us as Indigenous people. But it doesn't happen very often. So this again brings me back to this concern I have about that kind of rhetoric. And I really appreciate you, Elder Marie, for bringing up that YT supremacy, because when we hear potential leaders and leaders of parties talking about the good old days of John A. MacDonald and being unapologetic for our history, that just reeks of white supremacy to me.
Yeah, definitely.
Go ahead.
And Donald Trump is a clear reflection of the extreme that white supremacy can actually invade our thoughts and the core of our being. And it creates confusion, calamity, chaos, and it's destroying our humanity. That's how I see it. It's destroying our humanity, because we no longer are reflecting our ancestral way of being in our own communities. Like we've separated ourselves from each other spiritually, physically, emotionally. And it's so sad, because I so much want to not improve, to return to our ancestral way of being, so we can rebuild the strength that our ancestors had in maintaining our humanity the way Creator designed it, the way Creator meant us to live in peaceful coexistence, and abiding by the natural laws and the spiritual laws of the universe, and making sure that we the paramountcy of the sanctity of all life is key to our way of being and sharing our essence with other like, I don't like other human beings. It doesn't matter what race they are. They're still a part of us as human beings. And that's what our ancestors, that's why we accepted the YTs onto our motherland. But we had to uh, limit their use of our land. That's why the depth of the plow exists. The symbolism of the depth of the plow was put there by our ancestors to tell them you can only use the land for agricultural purposes only, because they were upholding the natural law, because they were upholding the spiritual laws of the universe. That's the only law they knew and lived by.
Absolutely. You know, I am so grateful that you came in tonight again. Thank you so much for joining us. And please stay on the panel. I do want to give others a chance just to talk about what they wanted to bring up, but I want to come back to you, Elder Marie, because that was something I also wanted to talk about tonight, was treaty and depth of a plow, but also beyond that, the treaty relationship that it's supposed to be, because we're treaty partners. And a lot of the non-Indigenous Canadians, but the majority of them, don't have a clue or any understanding of what that means to be a treaty partner. And something that you said made me think about stuff I ponder a lot. And I think about these folks that came here back in, the early 1900s, 1800s, even the late 1700s, when they started to come here. And I wonder sometimes what happened to them that made them so disconnected from land and all of the natural law that they must have known at one time too, from their ancestors, from wherever they were from. And I look at families like the Trump family and how disconnected they are. That man sees forests as fields of lumber. He sees water as just something we turn off and on. He sees this planet is just here for people like his own use and benefit, not that he's a part of it, or, so it's really so much to think about. So I really appreciate that you brought that up. Did you want to add something? I saw that your light came on.
No, I'm just acknowledging you.
Hey. Okay, we'll go over to Jana, but I do want to come back to you, Elder Marie, and we'll chat about treaty and the treaty relationship some more, okay?
Okay.
Hey. Jana, go ahead, my friend.
Hey, everyone. John A MacDonald, I'm definitely not a big fan of. The video I did about him got quite a lot of views, which I'm really happy about, because I really wanted people to know what PP was talking about when he brought up John A MacDonald, because I saw it as a huge red flag.
You were my inspiration for the topic tonight, so thank you. Yes, you were.
It just, as soon as I heard that, I just stopped dead in my tracks. I'm like, wait a minute. Like, I don't remember him being such a great guy. And when I started researching, I'm like, okay, memory was right. Because he was a YT supremacist. It's that simple. And he wasn't even racist for his time. He was racist for his time. He was the only one bringing up the Aryan race in Parliament. Nobody else was doing that, just him. And I'm sorry, like, a lot of people on my posts come back trying to defend him with, oh, but he built the railroad. It's like, yeah, but he used, I believe, Indigenous labor and Chinese labor to do it. And a lot of people died because of the horrible conditions that they kept people in. And because they were paying, well, and also on top of that, they were paying them less than half of what they were paying YT workers. So there is an ugly history there that we can't just whitewash, which is basically what they want, right? To just ignore the bad and put him up on a pedestal. And that's not something we should be doing. We need to own our history and the damage that it did.
Absolutely. And I hear a lot about, like in the classrooms in Germany, they teach these kids young about their history so that they prevent it from ever happening again. And it doesn't mean that we're bad people today or that the settler population are bad people today. Because, here's a little something about me. My mom is a non-Indigenous parent. So her father actually fled from what was then the USSR, but is now, and it was Odessa, but now it's Odessa in Ukraine. Because my great-grandfather was shot and killed by the Bolsheviks and left dead in the streets, and my great-grandmother could not take him even off the street to bury him.
Yeah.
And she had to flee with, I think, 8 children across those lands, leave 3 behind, and then come into southern Saskatchewan, where she did have family that gave her refuge. But my mom tells me she was never had a home again. Like, and they were considered quite well off, I think, you know, Dessa, right? But my grandfather, my non-Indigenous grandfather, would have been devastated had he known how he came to be a landowner in southern Saskatchewan. And also he was a devout Catholic. He would have, like, you know, I'm grateful in some ways that he passed away before the truth part of Truth and Reconciliation started to come, you know, we started to get some light on that, because he would have been heartbroken. You know, here were these two kind human beings. My mother shows up in her small little hick town in southern Saskatchewan with an Indigenous man, right? And my grandparents were very accepting. And you know, she thought I was the cutest baby, right? Because I had the black hair and the round chubby cheeks, and right. So, but I do acknowledge always, and I always try to share with even like my Indigenous colleagues too, that we can't blame settlers for everything, because they were lied to also. And many of them were also escaping something.
Yeah.
However, we all are learning the truth. And when we still have people that want to defend actions of the past instead of acknowledging them and move on and learn from them, that's where we get problematic, right? Like, nobody wants. I attended a meeting in central Alberta that a group calling themselves the Voices of Pigeon Lake and Wetaskiwin County, they held this meeting, and they wrote some pretty ugly stuff. So I wanted to go and see what this whole talk was about. And I walked into this hall of about 125 people who were very angry, and they were talking about overthrowing the county of Wetaskiwin councillors. But then after that discussion, they moved into a land back discussion. Now, I'm the only Indigenous person in this whole room. And I'm looking around going, what are you guys talking about land back? The woman at the podium was telling the people, Justin Trudeau is bribing all the chiefs in Canada to do what's called an addition to reserve, which is a real thing, because reserve lands, for everybody that's listening, reserve lands are federal crown land. They're held by the government of Canada. So this woman is saying that Justin Trudeau was bribing all the chiefs to buy land and then do what's called an addition to reserve, so that Canada will control all the lands, and that we're trying to make their kids feel guilty for the past. And I'm like, gee, how ironic. You think we're coming for your land and your kids, when we're not vengeful people. You know, I was saying this to my girlfriend one day too, and she's like, the last thing we want is this land after they've raped it. You know, we say that in jest. And land back isn't about ownership of land. We can talk about that too. But, you know, these are people.
It's back to the caretakers.
Yeah, and I was shocked that there's a room full of people, a hall full of people that have this mindset still and feel like we're now attacking them. So it's fine, very interesting.
Yeah.
Anyways,
and we each need to own our own histories. Like my grandfather was a Finnish immigrant who came to Northern Ontario and bought up a bunch of land that I don't know for sure, but I suspect it was probably Indigenous land. I mean, it was in the 30s or 40s.
Yeah.
1930s or 40s somewhere. So odds are, my dad doesn't know for sure, but I mean, likely. And I think it's important that we own our own history too. And just, I can't make it better, but I can at least acknowledge and be grateful for what we have, and just do better and be there, you know, when I can for the Indigenous community as a YT person, you know?
Yes, and I truly appreciate you, and I'm sure there's other Indigenous folks on TikTok that do as well, and that you did that TikTok about John A. So
yeah, and I'm so glad it's doing so well, because getting the word out is so important.
I agree. So thank you for that. Well, we'll pass it on then to ZB and Smarshy. I saw you're here, but ZB was here, so welcome ZB again. Nice to see you. I'm glad you made it back. So take it away. We were just talking a little bit about what Polyev said about the good old days of John A MacDonald and not being apologetic for our past. But it's just kind of a starting talking point, and you know, whatever you want to bring to the table is valuable and worth listening to.
Okay. I'll jump back to my original point after I finish the thought that I have with the John A. MacDonald comment. Okay. That to me is him telling us his plans for our children. he fully intends on taking our babies back to those days. Because he is not educated in the social sciences. And then I wanted to talk about the disconnection of the land. And in my opinion, because of how I was raised, like my cookum, Esther Big John, had me out in the woods, and I know that I first remember meeting little YT boys like when I was like 5, because we didn't have YT people around us. But I ended up getting apprehended, which resulted in me being away from home for a very long time. And when we talk that connection to land, I don't think that it ever goes away. I just don't think that we are listening for that voice that calls us back to the land. And what I mean by that is, ever since I got apprehended, anytime I could, I would go out to the woods and I would search for the river. The significance of that river is actually the river that runs through our nation and where we do ceremony. And that river is the one that I have always dreamt about and the one that I've always looked for. And I'd like to think that we all have hope of being having the land call back for us.
Oh, you got muted. You're muted. Hang on, you somehow
You guys
got
hear me,
muted.
or did I cut out?
Yeah, you were muted for a second. Okay,
Okay.
back to the river.
Anyway, yeah, I always dreamt about that river, and then when I went home for the first time, a couple years ago, I saw the picture of the river my brother had posted, and I was like, "Where's that river?" And he's like, "Oh,
You got muted again.
and
There you go.
and then when we went down there, it all started to make sense because every generation in my family has been a healer, because we directly descend from Ochis. So every single generation has been a healer as far as I know, which is really
You're muted again. I don't know how you keep getting muted.
it's because I keep getting phone calls.
Oh, okay.
So every time that the phone rings, it all
Okay, good. I was fun.
it
I
will
know it's not me because I'm not touching
mute me to
anything.
go answer the call. Anyway,
Okay.
as I was saying, when we went down there, I started to actually, because a lot of my childhood I've blocked out a lot of, which is where when I'm talking to elders, they can pick it off that I grew up differently than the new generation because of how I talk. And it's I started to unblock memories when we went down to the river, and I was like, oh my God, we used to come here to do ceremony, right? And it was like that thing that I was like, this is where I've been looking for. And I would search constantly as a little kid the riverbanks because I couldn't remember the way home. And, I'm going to tie all this together. When we talk about YT people and how hostile they are to the land, we have to acknowledge the fact that they were the guinea pigs. They were the first ones to go to boarding schools. They were the ones who had that, severed from the get-go. And they are the ones who went through it first. Not to minimize any of our trauma here. And that doesn't mean that it's the same. because ours is in much more recent memory. And I don't want to say memory either, but like we all know that that is way more recent to us than any other demographic out there.
Yeah. I feel for them it's normal. It's been
And
normalized.
that is like the fact that like YT people started colonizing and conquering themselves first. And they're the ones who went through this severed attachment first because they had to learn how to live under capitalism regime in order to become like the royals. And that is where we get into the lack of humanity, because it is ingrained in capitalism that you have to have a lack of humanity in order to oppress women and children, right? Because in law books, like even like in the intro to law, they tell you laws are built and they were created to protect white men and their property, specifically white men. And women and children are included under property. We're not seen as human beings, we are seen as property. And that is where we have the disconnect between YT people and ourselves, because our men are not like that. And I've noticed this so much. A little anecdote from dating a YT man in comparison to dating Native men. The contrast is wild, because I'm like, I know that like there are some things that I can say to a YT man that will get him going like that, and then I'll say that same thing to a Native man. They're like, I got you.
Yeah.
Like, there's a fundamental switch there that in our cultures that we take for, not take for granted, but like that is not widely talked about. And I think I hypothesize, because anthropology will tell you that this is not backed, but I theorize it is in how our men, if they grow up in our languages, of how they treat us, because the English language is already violent from the jump, whereas like our language, you know, women are included and they're woven into the languages, right? Like, because like I'm pronouncing this wrong and I'm gonna butcher the shit out of it because I'm not good at speaking Cree, but exo esque is also a part of the word fire, right? And esque is just means woman, right? Like there are so many things that like we are woven into it, and it, in my opinion, changes how you think, right? And it's going to change how our men move. And I think I really like to have hope in men, because I know good men. And because I know good men, that I like to hope that our men are also the reason why they are so conflicted and struggle in the settler world is the fact that they know that there's something that throws them off balance, right? Because a lot of men have talked to me about how they don't understand how to be masculine in the world, right? While living in upholding our traditions. And I think it's because of how we've capitalized masculinity into promoting it towards capitalism white tea society, and not our traditional roles of masculinity. And I kind of went off on a tangent.
That's
So I'm if anybody wants the floor, you can take it. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going.
it's okay. I appreciate you. No, I really appreciate you, and that's how we are though as Indigenous. We're oral.
tell me
We
that
like to share
I
our
can't hear
stories.
you.
You can't hear me? Can everyone else hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Everyone can hear me. You can't hear me?
He's on mute.
Okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
I want to, yes, Marcia, I just wanted to talk, I'll get to you right next, okay, sweetie? I really love what you said, because that language, I think, is the foundation to the way our people behave, acknowledge one another, are just connected with everything. And our language is the foundation of all of that. And the women and the men were respectful of one another and supported one another, and no one was above the other. But I do want to go back to something you said, ZB. And what you said about Mr. Poilievre talking about Sir John A. MacDonald, and how you said that he's telling us his plan for our children. Another creator here, I'm sure many of you follow her, Just Whitney. She also did a video the other day talking about what they're doing in Palestine is what they want to do here to us too. You know, they're testing it over there, and so they've not finished coming for us. And what you said there is just so, yes, like it was, you just made a light go on for me, because that is absolutely true. Because these politicians, they don't say things by mistake. Everything they say, every word in their speech is calculated and there for a purpose. So that's really telling. And I love that you put that together for us, that by what he said there is telling us what his plans are for our children.
Well,
And
sorry, I didn't want to
that's
cut you off.
okay.
I wanted to add to what you were saying. And I think that is an experience when you grow up fair skinned or like fair complected, is how especially in Alberta. So I can't speak for any other province, but I can speak to my own experience, and that is that they are very quick to say that you can be one of them, quote unquote. We all know that that's a lie. But is that they will just pretend that you're not native, and then they'll fucking throw out the most racist ass shit in front of you.
We got to watch
And
language, or we'll get
sorry,
there. Our live will be flagged.
it'll be me that's flagged. They will throw out the most like derogatory comments out there, and that to me, because my PTSD is so rooted in like racism, that there are a number, like that's how I get triggered.
Yeah.
Which when you're in Alberta, like that's everything.
100%. And
Like it totally is, and that's where I feel like there's the like unless you have grown up like that, you don't pay attention to the dog whistles and the racist remarks on how bad that what they're actually telling you.
because we get used to it, right? Or in a way, like we
Yeah.
almost become desensitized too, like as I've experienced it. And when I think back now, the wiser I get. And I think back about some of the things that I just brushed off or ignored, maybe even because I didn't recognize it as racism too. Or, I just even believed that I must have at maybe one time believed lesser of myself, perhaps. Like I did not, how I found out I was Indigenous? When I went to grade 1 and the kids called me a dirty Indian. Right? Like, no, I was never, because like I said, I wasn't raised with my indigenous, but I knew I was, looked like my dad. I looked like my dad compared to my mom, but it didn't really mean anything. You know what I mean? Because I wasn't in a cultural family. But then it was the racist kids that pointed it out for me. But anyways, I really appreciate everything you brought up. You brought up so much, because I do want to touch a little bit again on that connection to land, and how that connection to land and that river that you spoke about, it lives in us. And I too, like I've experienced, I actually did a past life regression in a hypnosis. And I didn't really know for sure if it would work or anything, but I had a vision of myself in a location, and it was on the prairies. And I know my ancestral lands are in the southern Saskatchewan on the prairies and stuff. And I actually found this exact location. I'm sure it was because my felts got there. I felt it. I'm like, oh my God, this is the place, right? So it's amazing how that connection to land lives in us. And I really feel like, I think about this a lot. I feel bad for newcomers that are displaced from their lands and don't have that connection anymore. Okay, ZB, I see you, and then we'll go to Smartsheet, okay?
Okay. Well, I want to add to that really quick, and that is, we often forget what our land actually, or what our language actually is, and that is it's the connection to the land. Our language can never be lost because it is the language of the land.
That's so beautiful. Absolutely. Thank you, CB. And I saw another creator did a video similar to that too. I posted it on my story, but I'm sure it's probably come down now. But anyways, thank you. You give me so much to think about all the time. I'm so grateful that you joined the conversation again this week. All of you, we have such good discussions. But I'll turn the floor over. Smarty, go ahead, my friend.
Can someone remind me about what Polyev had said, or is it the same stuff he's been saying for years?
Yeah, it was the John A MacDonald, how, the kind of good old days of John A MacDonald, and we don't want to be
Yeah.
apologetic for our history. The reason I bring it up is because I feel, and what I don't know if you were here at the beginning, I brought it up because our ancestors that were alive then were not considered Canadian citizens or probably even human at that time. They weren't allowed to vote. And now we are allowed to vote. And we have that right to vote and that right to say no to that kind of rhetoric. So I brought it up so that we can stimulate some conversation around, what would a Pierre Poilievre leadership look like for us? And,
it would look absolutely disastrous if it was up to Polyev. Let's just get that first and foremost. I'm in Berta Bama, or Trash Berta, as Charity calls it. So I know how it feels to be in a place where you're like in Canada and you're looking around, and it's as if you're in a three-dimensional world, right? Like you're looking around and you step back and you see everybody around you, and you look and you're trying to find connection. And the oddest thing I heard today by an American, nonetheless, was that Canada was always a white nation.
Who said that?
Some American on TikTok told me that Canada's always been a European nation.
Oh, okay.
And I'm like, that's what they want.
Not always.
No, and I understand that, and I'm like, okay, well, whatever, that's not true, but hey, and it's the colonizing mindset of what he said about John A MacDonald that really has me petrified. Because if you think about it, when John A MacDonald implemented the schools, we lost our rights, we lost our children, we lost our culture. No, ZB said our culture, our language is not lost because it's in the land, and it's in us, but it takes us to know and sit with the land and sit with the trees and the animals and the people around us and just kind of tune them out. But listen to the ground. Listen to your body when it vibrates. I'm standing here and I can feel my body vibrating through the steps. And I'm just sitting out here. I sit in my house. I put my feet on the ground. My feet are vibrating through the ground. It's that connection that entangles us in this earth, right? It's just, Polyev is going to be a dangerous person if by some dimension of the Pandora's box gets in. And that's what scares me most.
Yeah. Thank you. Me too. And, just exploring this thought of our connection to land, our languages in the land, we feel a physical connection. I didn't always fully understand it either. I started my career, what was then called Indian Affairs, and now it's Indigenous Services. So I've been on every reserve in Alberta and several in Saskatchewan. And I always felt this grounding, like my soul was being attached to the land in some way when I got onto these First Nation communities. And I never fully understood it. But I'm worried because folks like Donald Trump, Pierre Poilievre, they want these resources and they want to take more land and they want to get to the water and they want the minerals. So the more land that's being taken up, the less places we have to be practicing our culture, to gain our language, to have intergenerational transfer of knowledge. No province is in a hurry to clean anything up, to put it back to the way it was, so that, maybe we could take more if things were coming back, but that seems to never be the case. But I think, okay, we've heard from everyone. I want to go back to Cece if you want to bring anything back to the table.
Yeah, I do. I just want to say, that's great that you mentioned about the past lives. I also had a dream once about a past life, and it's always good to. Haven't done the regression yet, but that concept is a belief among a lot of some of our tribes. Sometimes the soul comes back, and yeah, so that's an interesting concept. The reincarnation,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a whole topic within itself. And myself, I'm from Bigstone, so you've probably been to my reserve a couple
I
of
have.
times. Yeah, Masagawi no niya, kita saga noche niya.
I thought you were from Big Stone, actually. I
Oh,
don't.
really?
Yeah, there was a girl there when I worked at the department. She used to call me Muche Squayo
Oh, yeah.
because I was always a little crazy. But yeah, no, anyways, go ahead.
But
Continue.
I was on TikTok the other day. One of my friends of mine, a Métis, another person who was non-Indigenous commented on their thing and said, "All you Indigenous people, all you do is sniff gas and sniff glue." That's what they said. So you sniff glue and on your reservations and just worry about your own people or whatever. And I wrote on there. I said, "This is such a racist comment. It's so offensive. Like, don't you know? Like, not like, this is we don't have reservations in Canada. We have reserves." And then I said, "We don't all have addiction issues. We're all on a healing journey. Just you can't make fun of people because they have addiction problems." But this person who is non-Indigenous had the comment to go comment on my friend's TikTok and say, "Oh, you people just all you do is sniff glue." That's the comment they have about us. And his other friends were defending him when I was saying stuff, and they're like commenting like, "Oh, he's just joking. He didn't mean it. He like it's just a joke. Like ha ha ha." But he meant it. Even if it was a joke, it's still racist. And
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's like what Lisa Dawn was talking about when she came up was there was a comment made that somebody made in a young person's video. And the commenter said, "We should have wiped you all out. It would have cost us less." And so she made a video back to that comment. And I actually ran into a video one day, speaking of racism, and this blew me away. This was I don't know if any of you've seen in Hawaii, there's a fella. He's a person of color. I'm not sure what his nationality is or his what his ancestry is. He has a cow ranch where you can go there and hang out with cows and hug them. They're healing cows, right? They're not for food. And lots of people, nice comments and stuff. And I'm looking through the comments, and one lady gets in there, and I don't know why I'm always surprised when it's women, but I'm not as much anymore. But this woman says in his comments, she says, "I'm not normally racist, but I make an exception for you." I was just floored that anybody could take the time to get into somebody's space. There was no reason for it. This was a lovely video about people hugging cows. Like what does someone get from that? It just reminds me back to what Elder Marie was talking about with YT supremacy, because those people want to keep us down so that they're above somebody. Anyways, I digress. I just wanted to share that story because it still floors me. And I see Elder Marie. Cece, are you ready to pass the floor?
yes.
Okay. Hi, my friend. Go ahead, Elder Marie.
Yeah, it's interesting how we conceptualize our sense of being within a colonial framework. I don't know what it's going to take for us. I don't like to use the word decolonize because it still embraces the word colony. And if we can find another word to self portrayal of our sense of being, like me, because I know I'm Newio, I conceptualize it as sacred being, created of four elements, and that's water, fire, wind, and elements of our sacred motherland. And we're trying to escape our reality as it has been built upon our sacred motherland. So for us to escape that, we need to our psyche is so tied up in that colonial framework to remove ourselves, or what's the word they use, divest ourselves of that way of thinking, we need to know what our ancestral way of being is. It's not was, it still is, because those truths are still there. I'm a political science major, so I usually talk in the terms that I understand the way I learned it in university. So when I look at how the colonial being organized themselves in a self-governing institution and squatted their institutions in physical form upon our sacred motherland, I can conceptualize it more. I can actually, see it as it really is, and we're trying to get away from joining that force, and that force is within us, and it's also within them, but it's not. It's duality of life. We're, because we're water, because we're fire, because we're wind, and because we carry elements like copper, zinc, whatever our creator put into our motherland so that she may live, her life sources. That includes oil, that includes, was that thing they make batteries with? Lithium. Yeah, that's all within us.
Lithium, yeah.
Yeah, and so the vibrations that our motherland is giving out in her frequencies to us, because we're so connected spiritually to her. She's giving out those, hey, I'm hurting, and it's our own vibrations, our own frequencies that have mobilized the fire, that have mobilized the water, that have mobilized the wind, because they're our protectors. We don't need an army. And the more we can get everyone else, every other human being that believes in the goodness of humanity, that's the frequency that we all need to stay on. It doesn't matter what the colonial being puts on paper. That frequency will overcome that, because our ancestors carry that frequency for us. Our loved ones that are in the spirit world carry that for us. Our creator is there to help us guide the way we need to go. So if we all join that same frequency, I think we'll get to where we need to be as collectively as human beings. I said enough.
Oh, hi. Your words give me hope. Sometimes lately I've been feeling a lot of dread and despair. And thank you.
Thank you, Lori. I appreciate you.
Yeah.
On the political end of things, Polyev et al. We have not just a moral obligation, but a spiritual obligation to our creator, because we made that sacred undertaking as Neweo, as Inu, as Kaskatewiyastik, whoever was born of this land, Turtle Island.
Hi.
We need to look at what it is we're actually mobilizing in colonial terms, which is you talk about voting, our right to vote. Well, those rights were given to us. We didn't ask for them. They were given to us by the white YT supremacist regime. And I don't think our ancestors were prepared for that. And I don't think that was what they were contemplating. And that's where the depth of the plough comes in. But having said that, the YT Constitution gives us, they've accorded their own society, the one that the immigrants that they bring in, they swear allegiance to Canada and all that stuff. They've given them a charter of rights and freedoms. They give them those rights when they come to our motherland. But they've separated us into Section 35, which says these are your treaty rights and these are Aboriginal rights, but we're going to give you an empty box. And they had their courts fill that empty box. So when you go into their political, your Poilievres, when you want to become one of those, I look at that as an individual choice, Then that's because of the free will Creator gave us, but not representative of the collective of our humanity as Indigenous peoples, because that's ours. We keep that to ourselves. That's the sanctity of our human essence. We have to keep that to ourselves to preserve it. Exit.
Mm-hmm. Oh, hi. Okay, I had something I wanted to ask you, and now it slipped my mind, but I'm sure it'll come back. I'm trying to
Marshy
write
wants to
things
say
down.
something.
Okay, but I see Sherry B has joined us. Smarshy, is it real quick or?
No, it's quite. It's
Okay.
okay. Sherry can go. I can wait till after.
Okay, thank you, my friend, because I'd like to give everybody a chance to speak before we all speak twice. Thank you. Go ahead, Sherry. Welcome. Hello. Oh, it looked like you were
Okay.
speaking. Oh, there
Sorry,
we go.
my phone was charging.
That's okay.
I just have a question actually to ask for everybody, because I know there's a few people in here who are from Alberta. And because you know how, if you're from Alberta, you know our government kind of keeps things private and quiet.
Yep.
So I want to know your guys' opinion as Indigenous for the whole thing with Kevin,
Yeah.
what his
Oh,
name,
you
the
don't want to
AI
know
thing.
Okay.
And
I have.
how does it work with, because I know, like, I have seen some videos that it's like it is on, and they want to put it on Indigenous land. And is there a way you guys can stop that from happening?
Is that data
That's all I
center?
wanted to
Yeah,
ask.
that's yeah.
The data center.
And I can,
Yeah.
if you want to look back to in some of my videos, I've done a video. There's the process here in Canada is called the duty to consult. And Indigenous people in Canada have the right to practice their rights on Crown lands, which are held by provinces and some by the federal government. And to be fair, all of these lands are Indigenous lands, all of Turtle Island. Some, though, now have private land ownership and deeded and, fee simple lands, they're called. So where this Kevin O'Leary proposed AI data center, which now turns out that it was the province of Alberta that approached him to do this. The plan was to purchase 200,000 acres of Crown land in the MD of Greenview, which is directly south of the Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation Reserve. However, those are shared territories. So there's other First Nations that utilize that territory as well. I worked for a First Nation in Musqueam, and we did some studies up there as well. So, because there's not much left in Treaty 6. So First Nations in southern and central Alberta are going further north in search of the resources that we require for ceremony, to sustain ourselves, for medicines, etc. So what the province of Alberta is obligated to do by law is to make sure that any project that they approve or permit or issue a license for under any legislation such as the Environmental Protection Enhancement Act or the Water Act or any of their public lands acts and the way that they administer public lands triggers what's called the duty to consult. And that means that the government is obligated to understand the potential impacts of an activity like that on the rights of the Indigenous people that use those lands. And once they understand those impacts, firstly, you want to try to avoid them. So move your project, go around the area where the right's being practiced, or preserve the resource that it is. Say it's a moose lick, just an easy example. So a moose lick is somewhere where we may frequent because we know that moose lick is there and we will be hunting moose in that area. So if this moose lick is going to be disturbed by the project, maybe we can move the project to avoid losing that site. Seldom does this happen. I've seen it happen one time. TransCanada bored under a diamond willow stand to protect the medicines that were there, so because they're becoming harder and harder to find in Alberta. So if you can't avoid the impact to the right, you then have to mitigate it, and that means make it less. So somehow make it less severe, or try to like make it a short-term impact so that the use or the resource that we're talking about will come back. That sometimes can't happen either. So then it's compensation for loss of use. So that's when First Nations and Métis in Alberta specifically will negotiate sometimes an impact benefit agreement, it can be called, or a community agreement, and some form of agreement that will offset the loss of that right that's attached to the land. Alberta is the worst at doing this. They minimize our rights. I want to share something really quickly, and I think it's important, and I see that we have a lot of Albertans here. I have been a duty consult practitioner since the duty consult has been a thing, since it was legally settled in the Mikisew case in 2005, and then the previous cases before that. So after 2005, the government started writing policies to implement the duty consult. The way the government of Alberta acknowledges traditional territories or traditional use areas for First Nations and Métis has only been recently because the government of Alberta refused to acknowledge the rights of Métis people up until recently, unless you were from a settlement. But if you were from the Métis Nation, then they didn't believe the Métis people had rights. But the way that they do this is called geodata, and they use it it's supposed to be based on when Fish and Wildlife officers identify an Indigenous land user on the land hunting or gathering or whatever, they're supposed to be recording this. And then each First Nation and Métis group has also got an opportunity to work with the government of Alberta to identify areas. But the government of Alberta wants proof. You have to prove you're using it. Even though we own the right, we have the right to be on the land. It would be like me having a vintage car in my garage under a blanket. I've had it there for a year. Just because I don't drive it doesn't mean I don't have the right to. But the government of Alberta believes that if we're not using our rights, we lose our rights. So then once you identify your area, your traditional use area, they go to a committee of white people who will approve it. Now, if this isn't problematic, I don't know what is. But I think Albertans need to understand this. This is what the government of Alberta is doing to Indigenous people within Alberta. They deny us our access to land. They deny us the ability to protect the resources that we rely on to practice our rights. And then they also make us prove that we even use the rights. And then they have the authority to decide whether or not we're actually doing it. So I think that's pretty problematic. So Sherry, to answer your question, the government of Alberta is obligated by law to ensure that that project is not going to negatively impact the rights of Indigenous people. And that means impacting land, vegetation, wildlife, water, air, cumulative effects, all of it needs to be considered. And what happened, why the government of Alberta is reluctant to do this, and you've heard me say this before, we hear from politicians who want to do red tape reduction and get rid of gatekeepers. We're the red tape and we're the gatekeepers, because the duty consult can add a year and millions of dollars to a project budget because it takes a long time to do this. The Trans Mountain Pipeline cost as much as it did because there were 300 and some First Nations and Métis that were consulted on that project. All of them had to have mitigation measures that were appropriate to their use on the land. They also had to have monitors on the land, and they also had economic opportunities associated with the loss of their rights. So, and that economic opportunity has to be at least equal to what we're losing. So if we're losing a hunting ground where we can harvest, say, 10 moose a year, and we feed like 200 families with that, what is it going to cost us to replace that moose at the grocery store? How much more gas are we going to pay going to that grocery store? What's the impact on our health going to be, because we're no longer consuming the traditional foods that we're used to? So this is a very complicated, lengthy conversation that developers are obligated by law to have in this country, but only when the government has a regulatory approval, such as a permit, a license, or other form of authorization, because the Crown has the duty to consult. They will give it to the company to have the conversation, but the Crown has to make the final determination that the impacts to rights have been adequately addressed. And Alberta fails at doing this in a good way every single day for the last 18 years. And they have continued to uptake land and impact us and push us off our lands over and over again. They've mismanaged water, they've mismanaged forests, and they have allowed for cumulative effects to occur to such a degree that now there's only 9% of intact land left in Alberta. 9%. And I can show you the data as soon as I figure out how to do cut cap and put some information into a TikTok, because I'm going to do it for everybody one of these days. So sorry for my rant, but Sherry, I appreciate the opportunity to share that with everybody. And I hope did that answer your question? And did anybody want to add? I don't know. Did I lose you, Sherry?
I can't really say what I want to say on TikTok. It's not appropriate. So I'm just gonna say FIFO. That's all I'm gonna say right now.
You know, I'm scared that, like, you know, the more they FA, the more we FO too, though, right? Because
Right.
but we are, and this is what really bothers me about that type of rhetoric that Mr. Polyev is spewing about red tape reduction and gatekeepers, and now John A. MacDonald and not being apologetic for our past, is that they don't care. They want to minimize our rights. They want to continue to colonize this land and take these resources from us, which, like Elder Marie has said over and over again, it was to the depth of a plow. We gave up, and it wasn't even to be given up, it was to be shared to the depth of a plow. So all these mineral rights that are held by companies and corporations in this country, are they really even legal? I question this all the time, but it takes so long to sort these things out in the courts.
Right. And the thing is, just before I drop down, because I do have other things I have to get done before tomorrow, you're absolutely right. When they F around and we find out, we also find out as well. But the thing is, they don't realize that we don't have enough water in Alberta to sustain the ground we have now. So for them to try to put in an AI, that would be taking all the water resources that we have in Alberta as a province, and we'd be done.
Absolutely. When I worked in that nation, we were looking at upgrading the water treatment facility. And so we did some water assessment studies. 20 years of groundwater left in central Alberta. So it wasn't even worth investing in the new water treatment plant.
And this is how we need to stop it. Like, this is why we need to stop it, because if we don't, Alberta will not survive. We will have no water for any of the running cities in this province, and it's scary. And Danielle doesn't care, so I will tell my unpopular opinion somewhere else, because it's not safe for TikTok.
Thank you, and I'm sure we all probably agree. But I really appreciate. I see that Sherry dropped out, and I really hope that answered your question. If you're still with us, and you know, I did see that somebody in the chat said, "How do we stop this?" And we need the voices, we need allies, and we need voices to amplify ours. And when you have, and nobody understands this, so few Canadians or Albertans have any knowledge around the duty to consult, and that this is actually a legal requirement in this country. And they do this on purpose, because then people are mad at us because we're perceived at holding up projects and, you know, impacting other people's livelihoods who are rooted in the resource development sector. But people forget that our livelihoods were rooted and attached to the land, and these lands have been taken from us. So I hope that helped. Go ahead, please jump in, because I don't want to take over everything.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about Marie Smallboy was mentioning that she did political science. So I did some of that too at the university. I want to do eventually a master's in Indigenous governance, and I'm always have a focus on the treaties, the understanding between our treaties. You know, the elders talk about the oral tradition, the written, the unwritten part of it, and our understanding of that. I come from Treaty 8, but some of my ancestors were from Treaty 6 as well. And there were some bands that never got treaty land in the treaty, like they were left out. There's a number of them, like the Pied-Span, Lac La Biche, where some of my ancestors came from. They never received the land that they were promised under Treaty 8 and other First Nations in Alberta. There's a lot of bands within Alberta who never got the land they were promised under the treaty. There's a lot of issues like that we have in Alberta also. Another thing I want to talk about was, they always talk about decolonization, but someone had told me once about this Maori scholar, Indigenous scholar, and he talked about, instead of always using the term decolonization, let's use another term. How about let's use the term like re-indigenization, like we're re-indigenizing. Instead of starting with the term of decolonizing, always colonization first, let's take another approach to it. And I thought about that. I thought, yeah, that's an interesting approach, about things. And yeah, a lot of it in Alberta does boil down to resources and the treaties. The depth of the plough you were talking about. That's true, because there's a lot of oil and gas in my territory. I come from one of the richest areas of gas and oil and diamonds and land itself, like worth in the trillions probably. God on total trillions, not even like exaggerating. Like the amount of oil here and the amount of diamonds and land that are on our lands. That's why it's taken so long to negotiate and get a TLE land claim settlement with the government, because they know how wealthy this land is. And we do it to protect our lands, but they're always trying to encroach more upon, like you said, the duty to consult. They're always trying to redefine. Every time we have to go to court, Supreme Court, and defend our rights, and take it there and challenge them. And there's always a new thing in the court. And a lot of times we're waiting on outcomes of different court cases. Like different First Nations have taken the government to court, such as, I wish he was on here, the Realist Native, because he always talks about the Beaver Lake First Nation and how they're taking the government to court about the things that are going on with the land and stuff.
Yeah.
So I just want to mention a few things like that. This, like, we could probably talk hours and hours about that and our understanding of the treaties and different things of that nature.
We could. And that's why we do this every Monday night at 6 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. So we can talk hours and hours about that. I see you, ZB. Just hang on 2 seconds if you don't mind. And thank you, Cece. That's exactly what I wanted to ask Marie about, that term indigenize rather than decolonize, because I'm working on some projects with the government of Canada right now that are changing, trying to change process and trying to build new ways in which to give more authority to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. Sadly, some of these things are at risk in an upcoming federal election. But we're using terminology like decolonize a lot too, and then kind of consider the indigenize would be a better way, another term. I wanted to know, Elder Marie, what do you think about that term indigenize?
It's a term that's used, that's now being indigenous is kind of an acceptable term that kind of flows freely within the minds of the Indigenous and south of us, and it includes the all Turtle Island Indigenous peoples. Despite our linguistic differences, those languages still sustain and maintain our indigenous, our ancestral concept of of the way Creator made us out to be. So indigenous is also a colonial term, but it's less derogatory and less, I don't know if there's one word that all the indigenous can, like, we tried calling ourselves First Nations. That didn't fly, because then every band thought they were a First Nation. And that's how they start to manage their affairs. But as self-governing peoples, and the sovereignty that Creator gave us with free will, with self-control, we have to figure out a word, a colonial word that's acceptable to all of us, to because English is the language we use to relate to one another beyond our linguistic differences. Indigenous or indigenize is I would think a self-identifying term that we could probably work with.
Okay, thank you. ZB, I see you popped up, my friend.
Hi. Okay, regarding back to Alberta, something that I find fascinating, and I have this theory. This is just a theory, so I don't want to get thrown under the bus for this, or it's like not a factual thing.
Safe
But I
place.
have this theory that the reason why Alberta is so racist, and I found like the prairie provinces to be the worst.
Yeah, I agree.
Um, but I think that that actually is associated to the manifest destiny, and I think that that is so ingrained in the society out there that that's just where they've just stopped progressing beyond that idea.
Hmm.
And that is my theory as to why they're so blatantly racist. Um, but I also wanted to add on to what Elder Marie had said, and um, I, but I forgot what it was. So I'm gonna hop down, and then I'll come back in a bit because
Okay.
I gotta make a
Can I
phone
just
call.
add to that?
Yes,
The
please
your
go ahead.
theory? They conceptualize themselves as superior, okay? And because they created racism, so you can't be racist against a YT person. So for us, the conceptualization of YT person, we give them their human being, their sense of humanity. We give them credit for that because not all YT people think in those terms. There's good YT human beings. They're the ones that kind of sustain their own people, and for us to be able to understand them better because of the way their brains were developed to consider themselves superior. I see that in the Afro American. I don't like being racist, but that's the word that they've kind of are comfortable with. They have that same superiority complex. I guess it is a superiority complex. It's in their mindset. So their minds cannot comprehend anything as valid beyond what their superiority complex allows them to. And that's fearful. For me, it's fearful because of the AI center that they're proposing to build on our sacred motherland is to create a colonial brain that only thinks in those YT superiority mindset. That's the mindset that's going to be built on our sacred motherland, and there's no room for indigenous thought processes in there. And I wouldn't want them in there because they'd be distorted and manipulated, and they'd create some kind of I don't know. That's scary. But I'll leave it there.
Top way. I see ZB wants to jump in, then we'll go over to Lisa.
Okay, a quick note before I hop down. And okay, leading off of what Elder Marie just said, so there is the Wabos. I'm sure you guys have come across them. They are African Americans who think that they are the original native people of this land.
Oh.
Uh, yeah. Anyway, they have this whole like doctrine against us and this whole thing. Anyway, when you actually go down the rabbit hole of that, it's based off of like the land bridge theory. Now, I'm gonna get to the point. Okay, so the reason why we are so debated, and I feel like this goes back to the terms that we have been called and what we call ourselves, is based off of the land bridge theory, right? Like, and it all goes hand in hand to disconnect us from our land. The land bridge theory, because in colonial terms, they cannot accept the fact that we could be here before them,
Yeah.
right? But I need to tie this to the black community, and that is the fact that the people that you referenced of that they come across as superior, comes across from the idea that we all originate from Black people.
Yep.
We have that one descendant from Africa, which is a part of the land bridge theory. And the reason why that they have quote unquote evidence, what did they pillage Africa for? Diamonds.
Yep.
And when they pillage our lands, it's oil. And they don't want to prove that we've been here this entire time because that supports our land claims to these lands. Right? And I do want to say, I do want to give my empathy or sympathy out to the Black Americans who do the wobbles because of the fact that I find it tragic that you would be so ashamed of where you come from and the story of Black Americans. It is so horrific, and you would not want to find pride in that. That I do give them empathy for that because that is still sad, and that is, yeah. And well, I'm gonna cut it off there because otherwise I'm
Yeah.
gonna keep tangent.
Can I just throw in 2 quotes?
Yeah.
Sure.
Um,
Go ahead, Cece. Thanks,
you know,
Cece.
I met some of these people online that think they're indigenous, you know, but they're not. And they're self-deluded, really, but they actually believe it, eh? And but there's archaeological evidence that they found mammoth bones, and they're doing a dig in California, and they're doing a road that have cuts on them that are over 100,000 years old. So that proves the out of Africa theory of evolution, that we migrated from East Asia 24,000 years ago or 120,000 years ago. That's false, because we were already in the Americas way before then. And that supports what we've always said, that we've been here from time immemorial. And our ancestors have always said that. We've always been here. We never came from anywhere. We've always been here. Like, we didn't spring up and walk over here 100,000 years ago. And another finding stuff here that are disproving their theories of the Bering Strait theory and all these things. And they make up all these theories just to disprove us, because they want to make us seem like we came from somewhere else either, because, you know, they always want our resources. It always comes down to that. Eh? Another quote I want to leave you with is a quote by Stephen Biko. He was in South Africa, and he said, "The most powerful tool of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed." So I kind of see that too. You know, like, it's a lot of these things. They colonized a lot of our minds and a lot of our things, and people believe in that stuff. Like, I remember one guy told me once, he said, "I'm a Bill C-31." And I told him, "You're not Bill C. That's a government piece of legislation. They'll never define you as your identity as a piece of legislation, you know?" And so, yeah, that's all I got to say.
Wow. Thank you for that. I need to think about that and sit with that for a bit, because that's quite the quote. Stephen Vico, you said, right? Most powerful tool of
The oppressor is the mind of the oppressed.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Cece, for that. And ZB, I see you're down. I don't know if you're in there still, but thank you for sharing your theory, because I can get behind that theory. Go ahead, Lisa Dawn.
Thanks so much. I had to come down to eat, but I was listening the whole time, and I'm back because I was really excited to see all the people that were asking, what can we do about what's happening out in Alberta? And I think, that's a big reason why I joined this group, is because I feel like I need to act, I need to participate. And so I wanted to just bring to your attention that was echoed in the chat several times. And one of the things that came to my mind was, we participated in a protest at the legislature that was organized by a organization called CPAWS, I think.
Yep.
And so, that was against the coal mining. And so getting involved wherever we can. I would also say being here and showing up to these kinds of conversations is a great start. Having these discussions and, letting other people know what you learned here tonight, if you learned things, and addressing those misconceptions that we see so often. And so I really, just because that's what I'm getting out of this, and I appreciate so much to have this connection and to see folks, inspired to act, and the compassion that I'm seeing from the folks here tonight inspires me as well. So I just wanted to share some of my thoughts about how to get involved. Thanks.
Thank you. Because, I can't keep track of the comments at the same time as well, because I'm trying to listen to what folks are saying. So thank you for sharing that too. And I love this space for that we are finding community, finding the people who we don't always agree with everything, but we give each other space and we respect each other's voices and positions. Where I feel sometimes you try to educate some of the folks that have more, maybe closed minds and their lived experiences. And especially being in rural Alberta, something I've experienced because I grew up in Calgary. A city's very diverse, right? Like, so I also went to school with kids that were from Sutina, so I got to hang out with them, and we all hung out with, the non-Indigenous kids too. And so there was a diversity of people and all from other lands as well. Then moving into central rural Alberta, my neighbors call me an effing squaw. They have fired guns while I'm out on the land, and there's a whole backstory to it. But like I do feel it was an intimidation thing, and like I feel like I ruin people's day just by being in the same space with them in a town like Rimby. I'm like, this is so disappointing. I didn't realize how racist this province is until I moved away from a city where there's much more diversity. And then having worked on reserve for 5 years, and I would gather elders and land users, and we'd go off into the land and do traditional land use studies. And we go to towns like Drayton Valley. One oil field worker confronted one of my elders that was there. She was out in the parking lot having a smoke after we'd spent a day in the field doing some studies out in the land. And this man comes up to her and said, "What are you guys doing here?" I just was like alarmed. And it's so awful. And I really hope that the folks that are in this room, and no matter what province you're in, another thing you can do is speak out, or, be a voice at times. My parents saw racism all their life because my mom's a non-Indigenous and my dad's Indigenous, to the point where my mom, like, they met at the same job in Regina. And the manager told my mom that if she didn't break up with my dad, she was going to lose her job. Obviously, I'm here, so she obviously didn't break up with him. But this is the way racism is. But my parents even taught me, just let it go. Don't worry about it. That's them. It's not you. But just letting it go is what has brought us to where we are today. And we can't let it go anymore. And I hope that our allies in this space will stand with us and speak out when we see this type of behavior. Again, when it comes to the land, if you can join us in defending land, we've all seen what happens when Indigenous people protest, or when we go out onto the land to try to protect our relations. The land is our relations, the trees, the animals, all of the plants, the water. That's our relations. That's our family. And we're trying to protect them. But we're the ones who get thrown to the ground and tased and jailed. And you didn't see that happen in Ottawa when we had a group of folks that went and sat there for 3 weeks. I didn't see any of them getting tased and thrown to the ground. So I'm hoping that we can see more of us in unity and together in these issues, because we all need water. We all need clean air. We all need this land to have a healthy life. So, Elder Marie, go ahead.
One of the things that I think that's a unifying sort of thought for all Indigenous across this continent is to reference ourselves within our ancestral presence, which is Turtle Island. We all have stories of why we call it Turtle Island. Every language has a story about why we all were born of this motherland as our motherland. So if we can change the discourse of self-conceptualization in our daily discourse, or in public places, is to reference ourselves within our own motherland, which is Turtle Island. In our language, we call it Minstick. That would be a good way of perpetuating our own thought processes out there as how we identify ourselves and relate to our sacred motherland in its ancestral presence.
Thank you for that teaching. And it's funny, like you brought this up because I find myself naturally doing that now more and more. Like when I put down where I live, I put Treaty 6. Like I know that's a colonial thing, but to me, in my mind, it takes me away from Alberta. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Wetaskiwin County. And it just helps me reclaim this area a little bit. And I do too. I now have added that Turtle Island because these are things I wasn't raised to understand, right? And I really appreciate these teachings, and it helps me reconnect with my ancestors. And I
Yeah.
feel those ancestors, and I want to
We
be, I want
acknowledge
to,
their, yeah. We
I want
acknowledge
to
them.
honor them. Yeah, and I want to honor them, and this is what scares me, because and why I brought up our ancestors back when John A MacDonald was the prime minister weren't able to vote or participate in this system, and I know this is an opposed on a system, but it's what we got. And I just feel, we now can get to those polling stations and we can put an X beside somebody that's going to perhaps work a bit harder than the last person to reconcile and to understand the truths of the past and to create a different future that's going to be good for everybody here in Turtle Island. I do want to be mindful. For me, it's 10:45. And I haven't had supper, and I do have meetings tomorrow. I'm very fortunate to be here. I've been invited to sit on the national table with Indigenous Services to work on waste management issues on reserve. So, and I share this, what I'm doing, because some of these things could go away with a new government, and especially if it's not a government with the same mindset as this current one and trying to do things differently. I'm by no means trying to say that this government, the Liberal government that we currently have, is perfect and maybe doesn't have ulterior motives as well, but I have seen good change, and I've seen good legislative change. Where the government is trying to write new regulation to empower and delegate authorities to chief and councils and other Indigenous leaders, and building new processes where Indigenous people can actually have some oversight over activities on Crown lands. So there's good things underway that are at risk in this upcoming federal election that I really motivates me to have these conversations with all of my relations here on Turtle Island, but as well as our newcomer and settler populations that are our friends and allies and that care and want to know about our past and also want to have conversations with us on how to make things better. So with that, if everyone doesn't mind, I'm gonna sign off. Next week I will be back in Alberta, and we can run all night if we want to. It's our time. The winter months is the time for storytelling and sharing, and I really appreciate all of you that joined the discussion tonight. Cece and Elder Marie and Smarshy and Lisa and Jana and ZB and Sherry. Even if we lost you, I really appreciate all of you that came up to have a discussion with us. And I'm sorry if you didn't get a chance to share, that if there was something more you wanted to say. But for the sake of time and my own mental health and my physical well-being, I need to get some sleep and make sure that I'm a good voice at that table tomorrow so that we can work hard to make sure that we're improving the lives of our people. So thank you all. Go ahead, Marie.
Pasqua. That's Treaty 6, Treaty 7, anything that's on the prairie. Pasqua.
Mm-hmm.
So
Subway.
add to your vocabulary.
I want to ask you a question before we go. So I understand that Pascua Mustos is buffalo, bison, right?
Yeah.
But Mustos is cow. So
yeah,
do you?
Mustos is the European cow.
Yes, I understand. So do you think that did the language evolve because we would never have seen cows? Or were they always Pascua Mustos?
Always.
And then
Yeah.
we just dropped the prairie part to apply it to the newcomer cow?
Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to understand how that came about.
Awesome. Love you
Hi,
all.
my friend. Pinanas komta now. Kisa kiten.
Missed
I'll
out.
see you next week.
Right.
Hi.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody.